Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi, and welcome back to a special guest episode of That Trippi Show with my co-host, Alex Shashlo. I keep telling everyone that we can win just about anywhere from Alaska to Ohio to Florida, and that the Senate is absolutely in play. But what about Kansas? Yes, Kansas too, folks. Today, we welcome one of the people working hard to take a Senate seat back in Kansas, State Senator Patrick Schmidt, who's running against Roger Marshall for the U.S. Senate. And recent polling, and we'll talk to Patrick about it, shows this is a race that he can win this thing. Patrick, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
And Alex, where do you want to get started, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, let's not bury it. Let's get right into it. Patrick, I know you've been working hard in Kansas, and I know there is a poll you guys put out, I think about a month ago now from when we're recording this. It's for our listeners, before we get into it, there's two kinds of polls. There's polls that aren't real, and then there's polls that are real. And when they're not real, it tends to be one of two things. One, if it's an online poll that some dubious pollster has conducted that is basically either just a pulse check, it can be useful, but it's not like we're going to base a ton of, hey, we're going to win this race based off of it. Or it's cooked in that the questions, the way they're framed, make it so obvious. It's kind of things like, would you vote for American hero Joe Trippi? Yeah, he's an American hero. Versus, that asshole Alex, right? That's an example of literally how you would cook a poll. This is not that. And so, Patrick,
no, this is GQR, which look, we've done a lot of work with them, a lot of work with a lot of pollsters, but this is GQR is literally one of the best reputation polling firms out there. And it's got the thing, pretty much, showing Marshall in trouble, below 50, 49, shows the race right now at 49-45 for Patrick. And you get into the Marshall's unfave, underwater, 35% favorable, 42% unfavorable. And Trump is, according to the latest Economist poll, Trump's approval is now -16.
Right, and your poll has them down five underwater. So, assuming that things have, and we're talking about this pre-show, assuming things have started to shift, Patrick, you're looking really good. Tell us about your campaign.
Sure. Well, absolutely. So we spent a lot of time thinking about this. I'll be honest, it wasn't an easy decision because my wife and I had our first child just a little over 7 months ago on election day in November. After talking with my wife, we did an initial PPP poll in January that showed that Marshall was at 37%, and the president was also underwater. Had the second biggest drop in the country after Alaska, and tied with Iowa. Jumped in, raised more than everybody else in the primary field put together for the first quarter of this year. And it's exactly what we were talking about pre-show. What's happening with the corruption, what's happening with the war, what's happening with the tariffs, and Kansas's agricultural and manufacturing economy is really hurting a lot of people. And the daily cost of this administration is, I think we're absolutely going to see it at the ballot box. And I think it's going to carry a lot of Democrats through in November in Kansas.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in Iowa and we talk about this, back, I think a few months back now, Trump's approval was -10. Today it's -20, same Economist poll that we're talking about where it's -16 in Kansas. So when you took this poll, when GQR released this poll some time ago, some weeks ago, these are numbers that have only gotten better for you and worse for Marshall and Trump on approval. I guarantee it, because everywhere else we're looking, and Alex, we're telling people don't go to sleep on Iowa, don't go to sleep in Florida, Texas, and yeah, Kansas is clearly. And this is a state, like you said, I mean, like Alaska. It's amazing. I mean, who would have thought that he'd be this damaged by, we would obviously, but I'm talking about the number -16 approval. Like I said, when you did this, I think you had it -7 or something like that. So it's clear these numbers have gotten much, much worse since your poll. What's going on in the state in terms of issues? What are you hearing at the doors? What kind of campaign are you running?
So I think one of the most illustrative episodes was when I drove out to southwestern Kansas in middle of March. And I don't think there's a silo between Topeka and the Colorado border, at least at that time, that didn't have grain from last year on the ground, mostly under Tariffs, but not all of them, because they couldn't sell it. I mean, what's happened, take the USAID cuts, for example. Kansas was basically the sole provider of grain sorghum for USAID. That was a $2 billion product for the state of Kansas that just got axed under Doge. And they hadn't replaced a buyer for that. And we've seen, we have similar dynamics going on before you get into what's happening with fertilizer, before you get into what's happening with fuel, with corn, with wheat, and with soybeans. And it's the market for all of those products is very bad because of what's happening with the tariffs and because of what's happening with diesel and what's happening with fertilizer prices. And the fertilizer problem is even more compounded because of how concentrated the monopolies are for those companies. I mean, all of these farmers are buying from basically the same two companies, and they're using this as an opportunity to jack up prices even further. So, those are absolutely coming through. When I'm knocking on doors, I myself have probably knocked on about 600 doors so far this year. And it's, the cost of everything is people are absolutely feeling it. And those are not just Democratic doors, and they're seeing the corruption and they don't like it. And one of the things that I'm proud of the most is that I have taken on corruption in the State House. I've made it a top issue for me ever since we had a vote on getting rid of property taxes for private jets in my first session in the Kansas State Senate in 2025. And unfortunately, we still have to battle that every day in Topeka. And if I have the opportunity, I'm going to do the exact same thing in the United States Senate.
You mentioned the corruption, you mentioned farmers. I mean, right now, I don't know if a lot of our listeners know this, but there is a massive fight happening in the Senate now over the Farm Bill with multiple amendments that are going on. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Roger Marshall was your potential general opponent, has an amendment to the Farm Bill that essentially is not so great for Kansas family farmers, for lack of a better phrase. It's been a very interesting fight in the last couple of months, and he's been front and center. And so what you're saying is you're seeing people on the ground in Kansas starting to realize not only is he not fighting for them, but he's kind of part of the problem now in DC, huh?
I would say absolutely. And I don't know if you guys have seen the headlines about Screwworm. Beef
Yes.
Beef is basically the only thing that is keeping Kansas agriculture afloat right now. And one major project of USAID was releasing these sterile flies to stop screwworm from moving north from Central America and getting into the United States. Well, they cut that program, and we've got screwworm in Texas, and it's only a matter of time before that gets up to Kansas. And it's going to drive beef prices even higher, and it's going to hurt those farmers when they can least afford it right now.
Oh, it's going to, and to be, blunt, it's going to go everywhere. I mean, it will be in Iowa, in Kansas. It will be, and beef is already, it's just really struggling. Literally the beef production is way down, prices way high, and farmers.
$10 a pound for ground beef.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible. And it's all because those idiots, it's like you talked about USAID. Now it's like, yeah, they cut the funding that was keeping this south of the border because of literally in Panama, we were just dumping, putting all these sterilized flies out there so that they would, to literally stop them from being able to reproduce and continue to migrate north. It was working. And then they killed the program. And now it's here. It's here in the United States. It's come north of the border. And once it's here, it's a very difficult thing to eradicate. It's just going to get worse, unfortunately, for farm. Not eventually it will affect other other meat products as well, because but beef for sure. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about you're in a primary. I know you said you raised more money than the others combined in the first quarter. How do you are there other co-front runners or something? I mean, how do you see the race right now and your position in it?
Sure, absolutely. So the primary election day is August 4th, and I got in early mid-February. I think it was February 13th, and I was feeling pretty good through the end of the first quarter. Like I said, raised more than everybody else put together, and I'm the only person in this primary field that's run for anything before. The only person that's been elected before getting into this race. I was the third highest raising Democrat in the state, and I beat the longest serving elected in the state of Kansas by 20 points in 2024 in my state senate race. So I think things are looking really good. We do have one new entrant since the end of the first quarter. It's the biggest biggest Methodist pastor in the country who's filed. I'm committed to running through the end, and I think that we've got a pretty competitive primary right now, and I'm hoping to come out on top.
So let's look ahead to the general.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back at Kansas, it's been you're not that old. It's been way past your lifetime since the last time Kansans sent a Democrat to the Senate. But statewide, Kansans are not exactly in lockstep with Trump. Obviously, Democrats keep pointing to Laura Kelly as kind of the beacon of how to win in a place like Kansas. Talk about your blueprint. Talk about what she's been able to do and how that affects your campaign, and what can our listeners who are not just interested in Kansas are looking in places like Iowa, Ohio, Alaska, Texas, et cetera. What can they learn from your race about how to take this fight to Republicans and actually win?
So I think the last time we came close in this race was when a president was losing his mind and starting wars. We had oil price shocks, we had stagflation, and we had an agricultural crisis. And Roger Marshall is no Bob Dole, but this does look a lot like 1974, when Dole only won by, I think, 10 or 12,000 votes. And so, a race in Kansas, it's not going to look like a race in a coastal state. It's not going to look like a race in Astoria, Queens. But it has the benefit. I was talking to an economist earlier today during call time. This is the cheapest Senate race in the country. It does make it hard to, get some attention, especially when a lot of consultants know that they're not going to have, a Texas size or Georgia size TV spend, but you don't need it. And you get the same vote in the United States Senate at the end of the day. Governor Kelly has made a point. Her thing is middle of the road, middle of the road, middle of the road. And you can't argue with the success that she's had and getting elected and getting things passed. The very first thing that I got passed last year was the very first tax cut for working Kansans since 2019 in Kansas. Right now in Kansas, the year a family gives birth, the child tax credit is doubled. It's doubled that year. And I think that's money that the Kochs and the millionaires and billionaires in Kansas are not going to get. And it only happens when Democrats stand up and fight. And people will reward us for it.
So when you're out there, and again, Joe and I have done a fair few races for Democrats in places where Democrats don't often win. When you're hearing, when you're talking to folks there, and I'm sure you've gotten the, "Oh, I like you, but I just wish you weren't a Democrat" kind of line. What has worked in conversations with voters that our listeners can take, kind of moving beyond the party or what's breaking through beyond that kind of party affiliation line that can be trouble for us in places like Kansas?
I like to say that I'm the door knockingest Democrat in Kansas, and this is something I've been working on for the last 5.5 years, and it's helped me. When I was running for Kansas too, I knocked doors from Kansas City almost all the way to Wichita, and almost all, basically all the way to the Oklahoma border. And so there's a lot of relationships from that field operation and fundraising that's helped me get to meet a lot of people, a lot of non-traditional people. But look, I'm a new dad. My wife and I are trying to juggle both working and figure out childcare and how we can make a difference in our community. I've chosen the issues that I think are most important and where I can make the biggest difference very carefully. And I think that they're by design, they're issues that affect they're 80% issues. They're still, if you take a ground up analysis of what's hurting Kansas, the war, the tariffs, the corruption, those are all 80% issues. You figure out how you can make a difference on those, either at the state or the federal level. And there are ways, even at the local or county level, you can open up a lot of conversations instead of, as opposed to, someone that's only getting advice from races on the coast or only looking at Twitter. So touch grass maybe is the best answer.
Well, and that kind of gets to a broader question. And Joe, I'm curious to your take. One of the problems we have always had when we find a race that maybe other Democrats might consider, or national Democrats might consider quixotic or more of an uphill battle. What's like the biggest mistake that Democrats are making when we try to compete in a place like Kansas, or when we're looking at a race like this?
I think sometimes the mistakes happen years or election cycles before you kind of anchor on a race. I think certainly something that I've seen in Kansas and in other states is sometimes the overwhelming majority of our elections we don't contest. How many state house races? There's 125 state house races in Kansas out of over 105 counties. This is a big state with only 3 million people. How many state house races are we really competing for? How many are we losing by 1,000, 1,500 votes? Because those are all winnable house races for us. There's a local IBEW in Topeka. It's right by my post office box. So I stop there, I chat with the guys, and they're supporters of mine. I want to know what I can do for them. I give the same spiel about them getting registered as precinct committee people several times. And the chapter organizer says, what can we really do here? Because we're getting screwed out of contracts from Shawnee County. And I said, well, where do you live, Cooper? Your county commission district is up this year. And we haven't competed for that seat seriously in a long time. And, I think having building trades, having IBEW at the table for discussions when contracts are happening in Topeka, that's going to make a big difference for you guys. And he's running and he's going to win. So I would say that's one thing. I think, I see a lot of people getting fleeced by consultants. If you're spending $3,000-$4,000 a month on a state legislative consultant for a state legislative race in Kansas, that's not a recipe for success. It takes a lot more shoe leather and just candidate call time to make sure that you're putting in the real work that's gonna harvest, not just in that month, not just that year, but over cycles to get you reelected and get more people reelected. And I think what's your why? I got into this not because I thought it was easy, but because I was at the Capitol on January 6th. And I remember I was stationed in DC at the time and living across the street. There were a bunch of law enforcement officers that were standing on First Street Southeast between the Capitol and the Supreme Court and the Library of Congress. And they didn't feel like they could do anything when people like Michael Fanone were getting the shit beat out of them 100 meters across the way. There's no cavalry coming to save any of us. If we want to save this project, and I do, both for my kid, still being in the Naval Reserve, then a lot more of us need to roll up our sleeves and knock on doors and make phone calls.
Yeah, I wanted to get into your service because you're a former U.S. Navy intelligence officer, and I think that's got to be a plus. I mean, going back to serving your country, I think is real important in Kansas. It's important everywhere, but I think that's got to help you at the doors. I mean, and how's that compare with Marshall in turn? What's the contrast between you and him? And if you can get a little bit more into, again, a lot of the people listening or watching may not know anything about you other than, you're on that Trippi show with me and Alex, and we're telling them that you can win this thing. But you want to give a little bit of time so you can explain what, a little bit more about yourself.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm a sixth generation Kansan on both sides of my family. My dad, comes from a long run of Mennonites that came over from southern Ukraine and started growing wheat in Kansas, I think about 160 years ago. And everyone before him was a farmer, and he harvested wheat with his family business, custom cutting from Texas all the way to North Dakota until they lost their family business during the farm crisis in the 80s. And he drove those combines in himself. He's the first person in his family to go to college, became an elementary school teacher, taught for 50 years, literally until the day he died. And he, died with nothing left in the bank because of, his struggles with heart disease and COPD that, left my family with a lot of debt. My mom's family comes from Southeast Kansas, and she was born in Pittsburgh. Also came from a string of coal miners, and they brought her grandfather home on the cooling board after he died in an explosion when her mom was, I think, 21 years old and still pregnant with her first. Sorry, this is her grandmother when her grandmother was pregnant with my grandmother, and they moved to Kansas City. She became a teacher just like her mom and grandmother, and she taught for 41 years elementary school. They met while they're teaching at the same elementary school. After I graduated from college, I commissioned as a naval intelligence officer, served on board the USS Ronald Reagan, served with the Special Forces team in Bahrain, and then at the Office of Naval Intelligence, where I finished up being on active duty and moved to the reserves. And I'm still in the reserves right now.
And so what is how do you contrast Marshall? I mean, let's get to the real fight here. And you talked about the farm stuff, but what, and I totally agree with you there. I mean, the contrast is real and powerful, but are there, basically how do you match up with him? I mean, age, you got to be one of the younger Senate candidates out there right now. And I definitely think people want change, and I think that's got to be appealing as well. But what are people responding to?
Well, I think they want someone that, and you'll see this in the poll when you as you go through the questions, but they want someone that'll stand up for Kansas, not stand up for a party. And this is a guy that first, was a healthcare executive that became very rich by closing hospitals in Western Kansas, and he got elected to Congress in 2016. And has been a yes man for this administration from day one. And when it comes to the cuts that have really hurt Kansas on ag, on healthcare, on the tariffs, on the war, has been a yes vote. One of the other big things that really drags down Marshall in the polls, and certainly if you're paying any attention to Kansas headlines, is that he lives in Florida. He hasn't lived in Kansas in years. He lives in in or around Sarasota.
This is something this is kind of like a new strategy that the Republicans have, because there's another candidate, senator I can think of, who lives in Florida and is the senator from Alabama. So so this is some common.
Florida's got 4 senators.
Yeah, they've got 4.
Yeah,
pretty amazing.
And it is in the Constitution that you're supposed to live in the state. So. That's, I think that is the contrast. I've stood up to power on both sides. I've been consistently the loudest voice for property tax reform in Kansas on the Democratic side. And I think finding the issues where it makes sense for Kansas is not something that we've had. Certainly in from Roger Marshall, and as an opportunity that I think, I hope people consider my candidacy for that reason. Just another example here. Because of the corruption in this administration, we have basically no laws around protecting kids from artificial intelligence and these LLMs. And we've seen a number of cases nationally and in Kansas where they have been coaching kids to commit suicide, self-harm, or engaging in very age-inappropriate sexualized conversations. And it's the Wild West. There's basically no rules, no laws against it. I worked with some of the top lawyers in the country on this issue that have been plaintiffs' attorneys on these cases where ChatGPT has coached a kid to commit suicide. So we could stop this in Kansas. Stop it. And if we don't stop it, then those companies are going to lose their shirt because we're giving parents a right of action. And, even one of my Republican colleagues said, Patrick, this sounds like a Republican issue. And I said, great, let's pass it. And then all of a sudden, midway through the legislature this year, all my Republican colleagues go dark on it. They all go dark. And we've since learned, I think a couple Wall Street Journal articles, where the White House told state legislatures, including Kansas, we don't want any legislation on these issues. None. So you've got kids that are going to die, and absolutely kids in Kansas that are engaging in including preteens, engaging in very, very graphic and age-inappropriate conversations with these chatbots, and the parents. And we missed an opportunity to implement the strongest laws in the country to help parents raise their kids. And that's corruption. That's wrong. And it's something that I'd like to be a voice on in the United States Senate.
So we're getting close to time here. I guess my final question to you, Patrick, is, what do you want to leave our listeners with to watch out for as we get into the fall here with your race?
We need at least 52 votes in the United States Senate come January 2027, and we need at least 51 come January 2029. I think the only way to get that math is to put Kansas in the mix this year. Your money doesn't go very far in Texas. It doesn't go very far in a lot of states. But in a place like Kansas, because of what's happening with the war, the corruption, the tariffs, Kansas is one of the most competitive and certainly the cheapest Senate seat in play this year. And if you could help me do it, I'd love to go to bat for you in the United States Senate. PatrickForKansas.com.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my last thing. Is where can people go for it? But where can people find out more about you? Where can they, if they want to help and donate, give it to them one more time? Where can they find more information or donate to your campaign or help in some way?
So check us out on Facebook. You can find what we're doing. Our website is PatrickForKansas.com. We're on ActBlue. I prefer check because that stops ActBlue from taking their cut. Our PO box is Patrick for Kansas, box 750783, Topeka, Kansas 66675. My email is info@patrickforkansas.com. I'd love to hear from you. Love to earn your support and appreciate you taking the time to consider it.
Great. Well, that's a good place to end here, Patrick. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
It's really important. I honestly, first of all, I agree that, first of all, things are going to change and move. I think things are going to, unfortunately for everybody, get a lot worse economically between now and November. I don't think gas prices are going down. I don't think anything is going to help the fertilizer or those silos that you're talking about, and the screwworm now that's going to wreak havoc on beef producers as well. So all that's going to get a lot worse, and we're already talking about minus 16% approval for Trump in Kansas. And I think, your profile, former Navy intelligence officer, who, as you said, served your country, now in the reserves. And I think that experience, along with your age and what you've accomplished in elected office so early on in a state like Kansas, is pretty impressive stuff. I hope people will get behind you. As you say, Kansas is going to be, more money and more impact for your money if we can win that state. And look, and I agree with you. If we're going to get to 52, if we're actually going to make a big dent in this thing, it's going to have to be because some of these places that people are sleeping on right now, Kansas and some of these other places that are getting a little bit more noted, which is why we're having you on, because we want people to pay attention. We got them to focus on Iowa early on, about 3-4 months ago. Now everybody's talking about that. Hopefully that the same thing will happen now that you've been on here in regards to Kansas, and get other people talking about this race, because Patrick Schmidt can win this thing, folks, but he needs our help. So thanks, Patrick, for coming on, and thanks everyone for listening to or watching That Trippi Show. Make sure to join us at sez.us. It's a civil social network for real people, not bots or algorithms. And this podcast will always be free and is part of Lincoln Square, so check out the latest at lincolnsquare.media. Also, if you're listening to this episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to get alerts when we post the next episode. And you can always send us a question to thattrippishow@gmail.com or leave us a question and review on iTunes. We'll see you next week. Patrick, thanks a lot for being with us.
Thank you very much, Joe.